Subscribe to see more stories. Enjoy your viewing.
My name is Michael Adams, and for the past 10 years, I believe that the life I built with my wife, Rebecca, was a fortress of trust and shared dreams. Yet, beneath the veneer of our seemingly perfect union lay secrets I was never meant to discover. This is my story, a painful, raw narrative of betrayal and heartbreak. I remember the day I first sensed that something was off. It was a chilly autumn afternoon when I returned home early from work, a rare occurrence born from a sudden cancellation of a meeting. The house, usually filled with the aroma of Rebecca's cooking and the soft hum of our favorite old records, was unnervingly silent. I paused at the doorway, half expecting to see her bustling about in the kitchen, but instead found the space empty. My mind raced, grasping for explanations. Perhaps she had simply run out to meet a friend? Yet, there was a heaviness in the air, a premonition that I was about to confront a truth too brutal to ignore. The following days unfolded like a slow, agonizing descent into disbelief. At first, it was subtle, misplaced phone calls, cryptic text messages, and a growing distance in the way she smiled at me. Rebecca, once so open about her day and her feelings, began retreating into herself. I tried to engage her, to ask questions that might bridge the widening gap, but the conversations felt strained, as though we were both tiptoeing around a topic too dangerous to acknowledge. It was during one such strained evening that I stumbled upon a clue that shattered my fragile hope. I had been tidying up our shared study, a room filled with mementos of our happier times, when my eyes caught sight of a receipt tucked behind a stack of mail. It was from a boutique hotel, a place I had never heard Rebecca mention, yet the date was clear, the very night we had planned to celebrate our anniversary. The discovery sent shockwaves through my heart. How could someone I loved so deeply betray me in such a deliberate and calculated way? The days that followed were a torrent of emotions, confusion, anger, despair. I oscillated between confronting Rebecca immediately and waiting for more evidence, for something that might confirm my suspicions without leaving any room for doubt. Eventually, the relentless gnawing of uncertainty forced me to confront the painful reality. I gathered every piece of evidence I could find, furtive phone calls intercepted on speakerphone, emails with cryptic subject lines, and a pattern of late-night absences that painted a damning picture. When I finally confronted Rebecca, the words spilled out in a mixture of anguish and disbelief. I remember the trembling in my voice as I demanded answers, my eyes locked on hers, searching for the remnants of the woman I once knew. The conversation was a painful cacophony of half-truths and bitter denials at first, until the inevitable moment came when she could no longer hide behind lies. With a broken voice and tear-streaked cheeks, she confessed that she had been unfaithful, a betrayal that had begun as a fleeting affair but had grown into something far more complicated. The woman she admitted to loving was not a stranger, but a colleague, someone she claimed had filled a void that she felt had been left unattended in our marriage. The confession did nothing to dull the sting of betrayal, rather, it intensified the pain. I felt as though every cherished memory of our past, our shared laughter during long summer evenings, the gentle touches that had once reassured me of our mutual love, had been tainted. The man I thought I knew was now adrift in a sea of doubt, his self-worth questioned by the very person he had vowed to honor and protect. In that moment, I realized that our marriage, built on years of trust and shared dreams, was nothing more than an elaborate facade that had slowly crumbled away. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself trapped in a relentless cycle of introspection and regret. I questioned every decision I had ever made, every moment of complacency that might have led me to overlook the warning signs. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake in bed, would replay every conversation, every smile Rebecca had offered, trying to decipher the hidden meanings behind her words. I sought solace in memories, in the echoes of a past where I believed that love was a constant, unyielding force. But the more I clung to those memories, the more they dissolved into a haze of what-ifs and bitter regrets. Friends and family tried to offer comfort, urging me to see that sometimes, people grow apart and that the fault did not lie solely with me. But their well-intentioned words only deepened my sense of isolation. The betrayal had left a scar too deep, a wound that no amount of sympathy could heal. I began to withdraw from the world, retreating into a solitude where the pain was all I had left. Each day was a struggle to reconcile the man I once was with the shattered remnants of my identity. Yet, amidst the darkness, I vowed to find some semblance of closure. I started journaling, pouring every emotion, every question, and every sorrow onto paper. In those pages, I confronted my fears, my anger, and the lingering hope that perhaps, one day, I could forgive and rebuild. But as much as I wanted to believe in the possibility of healing, I could not ignore the bitter truth: the betrayal had changed everything irrevocably. Now, standing at the precipice of a future I never imagined, I see the inevitable end approaching, a hostile breakup that will tear apart the last fragile threads of our union. I know that our story, once filled with promises of forever, is destined to end not with a gentle parting, but with a final, vehement severance. In the coming chapters of this narrative, I will continue to explore the aftermath of Rebecca's betrayal, the struggle to reclaim my identity, and the bitter confrontation that will ultimately force us apart. For now, as I reflect on these painful memories, I am left with the understanding that some wounds are too deep to mend, and some betrayals are too profound to ever truly forgive. In this painful journey of self-discovery and heartache, I have learned that the love we once held can sometimes be a double-edged sword, a source of both immense joy and unbearable sorrow. As I set down these words, I acknowledge that I stand at a crossroads. The man I was is no more. What remains is someone forged in the crucible of betrayal and loss, a person forever changed by the harsh realities of a broken promise. And while I know that our paths will soon diverge in a final, hostile breakup, I also know that from this devastation, I must find a way to piece together a new future, a future where trust, however fragile, might one day be rebuilt, even if only in the quiet hope of a better tomorrow. This is only the beginning of my story, the first of 4 chapters that will chronicle the painful unraveling of a marriage and the subsequent search for meaning in a life marred by deceit. With every word I write, I am forced to confront the demons of my past, yet I remain determined to emerge from this ordeal, scarred but wiser. The journey ahead is daunting, filled with uncertainty and lingering bitterness, but it is a journey I must undertake if I am ever to reclaim a piece of the man I once was. In the days following Rebecca's confession, I felt as if the ground beneath me had shifted into an endless void. The shock of her words reverberated through every fiber of my being, leaving me with an overwhelming sense of emptiness and isolation. I spent countless hours wandering through the silent corridors of our once shared home, each room a painful reminder of the love we had built together, now tarnished by deceit. Every morning, I awoke with a heavy heart and a mind cluttered with memories of better days. The sunlight that filtered through the curtains felt less like a promise of a new beginning and more like a harsh spotlight on my despair. I tried to maintain a semblance of routine, preparing breakfast, checking the mail, and going through the motions of daily life, but each activity was tainted by the ever-present ache of betrayal. At work, I found it difficult to concentrate. My colleagues noticed my withdrawn demeanor, the forced smiles that barely concealed the storm raging within. My office, once a sanctuary where ideas and dreams took flight, now felt like a prison of reminders. Every time my phone buzzed or an email notification popped up, I'd momentarily freeze, half expecting another piece of evidence to confirm the harsh reality that had been thrust upon me. Yet, nothing could truly prepare me for the gnawing uncertainty that invaded my thoughts. Late one evening, after a particularly grueling day, I decided to confront the memories head-on. I sat in the study, surrounded by relics of happier times, old photographs, mementos from vacations, and tokens of our shared triumphs. I picked up a faded snapshot of Rebecca and me laughing by a lakeside during a summer retreat. In that image, we were so full of hope and unblemished trust. But now, as I stared at her smiling face, I couldn't help but feel that it was all a carefully constructed illusion. I began writing letters that I never intended to send, pouring out the turmoil of my soul. I described the slow disintegration of our marriage, the subtle signs I had missed, and the painful realization that trust had been irrevocably broken. Each word was an attempt to make sense of the chaos that had invaded my life, a desperate bid to regain control over the narrative of my own existence. The pages soon filled with a torrent of emotions, anger, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal that would not let go. One particular night, as a bitter winter wind howled outside, I confronted the silence that had become my constant companion. In the stillness of our living room, with only the soft hum of the heating system to break the quiet, I found myself mentally retracing the steps that had led to this irreversible rupture. I questioned every conversation, every missed glance, and every fleeting moment of doubt that I had once dismissed. It was as if I was unraveling the tapestry of our shared history, thread by painful thread. I reached out to some old friends, hoping that a familiar voice might offer a glimmer of solace in the midst of my emotional tempest. Yet, every attempt to confide in someone only deepened my inner conflict. They offered advice, urging me to seek professional help or even consider counseling, but how could I talk about a betrayal that felt as personal as a wound etched into my very identity? Their words, though well-meant, often seemed to brush aside the gravity of my feelings as if I were simply overreacting to a minor misfortune. In the quiet aftermath of our confrontation, I found myself oscillating between moments of seething anger and periods of reflective introspection. I recalled the times when Rebecca had been my pillar of strength, a beacon of support during my moments of self-doubt. It was ironic, I thought, how the very person I had trusted with my heart could become the architect of my suffering. The irony was not lost on me, and it fueled an internal battle between the desire to confront her with every ounce of my wounded pride and the desperate need to preserve what little dignity I had left. During one of these turbulent nights, I decided to reread our old journals and letters, documents that chronicled our dreams and aspirations. I was searching for clues, trying to pinpoint the moment when our path began to diverge. The words on the pages, filled with youthful optimism and shared promises, now served as a painful reminder of how drastically life could change. Each sentence was a ghost from the past, whispering stories of love and laughter that now felt painfully distant. In the midst of this emotional chaos, I encountered a turning point. A letter from Rebecca, which she had written long before her affair began, a letter in which she had spoken about her hopes for our future, suddenly seemed like an artifact from an alternate reality. I began to question everything. Had I been naive to believe in a love that was so vulnerable to the forces of betrayal? How could I have missed the warning signs when they were right there, hidden in plain sight? These questions tormented me day and night, eroding the foundation of the man I once was. As the weeks turned into months, I felt an undeniable pull towards confronting not just the pain but also the man I had become in its wake. I started frequenting a support group for those who had experienced infidelity, a place where the stories of broken hearts converged in an honest and raw dialogue. There, in the shared experiences of strangers, I found a strange sense of solidarity. While nothing could mend the scar that Rebecca's betrayal had left, the community offered a mirror in which I could begin to recognize parts of myself I had long forgotten. Every session was a step on the long and arduous path to healing, yet the wounds remained fresh. I was forced to reckon with the reality that no amount of understanding could erase the fact that the woman I loved had chosen a different path, a path that led her away from our shared dreams and towards a future that excluded me. The pain was palpable, but so was the growing realization that I needed to let go of the past to embrace any chance of moving forward. In the quiet hours of reflection, I made a silent vow to myself: I would reclaim my life piece by piece, even if that meant facing the world without the comforting illusion of our once perfect union. The journey was just beginning, and while I was still consumed by the echoes of betrayal, I could feel the stirrings of a resolve to rebuild from the ruins. The chapter of our shared life was closing, and though the pain of betrayal was far from over, I sensed that it was time to confront the reality of our fractured marriage head-on. I knew that Rebecca and I were hurtling toward an inevitable confrontation, a final showdown where every suppressed emotion, every unspoken word, would finally have its say. The future loomed with uncertainty, but one thing was clear: the man I was today was not the man I would be tomorrow, and the legacy of our love was destined to be rewritten by the harsh truth of betrayal. The days blurred together as I teetered on the edge of despair and indignation. Every morning, I woke with a deep-rooted heaviness that whispered of the inevitability of a showdown, a confrontation that would either shatter me completely or force me into a form of rebirth. The house, once a shelter of our shared memories, now felt like a battleground strewn with remnants of trust, hope, and innocence lost. I had spent countless hours wrestling with the memories, the bitter taste of betrayal staining every thought, until finally, I could bear the silence no longer. It was on a rain-soaked evening that the final confrontation began to take shape. The sky, a relentless sheet of gray, mirrored the turmoil that roiled inside me. I found myself pacing in our living room, the soft patter of raindrops against the window providing a mournful soundtrack to my restless heart. I had long anticipated this moment, rehearsing words and sentences that I never thought I'd have to speak. Now, every step felt like a march toward an uncertain destiny. When Rebecca walked through the door that night, she seemed both familiar and distant, as if the person before me was a stranger wearing the skin of the woman I once loved. Her eyes, usually warm and inviting, flickered with apprehension as they met mine. I could see in them the shadow of guilt and a hint of fear, as though she, too, was caught in the crossfire of our unraveling lives. The silence between us was thick, laden with years of unspoken words and the weight of a shared history on the brink of collapse. "Michael," she began hesitantly, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind, "we need to talk." I could barely control the storm raging inside me. The words I had rehearsed now felt like shards of glass, sharp and dangerous. "Yes, Rebecca, we need to talk," I replied, each word measured and laden with the pain of betrayal. I motioned for her to sit, but she stood rooted in place, as if paralyzed by the magnitude of the moment. For a long, agonizing moment, I simply stared at her, my mind racing with a torrent of emotions, rage, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of loss. "I can't keep living in this lie," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Every day, every moment, I'm haunted by what you've done. The trust we built, the promises we made, they're all shattered." The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with the remnants of memories that once brought us joy. I could almost see the ghost of our past selves, laughing together under brighter skies. Now, all that remained was the painful acknowledgement of the chasm that had grown between us. "I never wanted it to come to this," Rebecca whispered, her eyes brimming with tears. "I never meant to hurt you." Her words, meant to soothe, only fueled the flames of my fury. "Hurt me? You think apologizing can mend the wounds of deceit?" I countered, the bitterness in my tone unmistakable. "Every lie, every secret, every stolen moment with someone else has chipped away at the foundation of everything we once had." I paused, struggling to contain the whirlwind of anger. "I was your partner, your confidant, your husband. And you chose to betray that trust." As the rain intensified outside, so did the torrent of our emotions. Rebecca attempted to explain how loneliness had crept into our marriage, how she had felt isolated despite the shared life we had built together. But with each attempt at justification, the gap between her reasoning and the reality of her actions grew ever wider. "I felt invisible," she murmured, almost inaudibly. "I felt like I was fading away, and someone made me feel seen again." Those words, simple yet devastating, cut through me like a knife. I had always prided myself on being attentive, on knowing every nuance of Rebecca's hopes and fears. How could it be that I had missed the signs of her growing solitude? "You were supposed to talk to me," I said, my voice cracking under the strain of unshed tears. "We were supposed to face our problems together. Instead, you chose to hide behind someone else's arms, someone who was never meant to replace me." In that charged moment, the room became a crucible of raw emotion. I could no longer distinguish between the man I once was and the one emerging from the wreckage of our relationship. The grief of lost love intertwined with the burning anger of betrayal, creating a cocktail of feelings too potent to contain. Every time I see you, every familiar corner of this house, I'm reminded of what I've lost, I admitted bitterly. And every memory is now stained with the knowledge that you could simply walk away with a stranger. The conversation spiraled into a painful recounting of all that had gone wrong, the missed calls, the secret meetings, the long nights that were no longer shared between us. As each accusation landed, it reverberated through the space between us, eroding the last vestiges of what we once had. Rebecca's defenses crumbled under the weight of my unrelenting scrutiny, and soon, her voice was reduced to a series of apologies that did nothing to ease the ache in my heart. "I'm sorry, Michael," she repeated, her words a constant refrain in the symphony of our despair. "I'm so sorry." But each apology felt empty, a hollow echo that could never fill the void of betrayal. In my eyes, her remorse was but a final attempt to salvage a marriage that was already beyond repair. As the confrontation drew on, the dialogue took on a more definitive tone, a mutual recognition that what was left between us could never be mended. It was no longer about the specifics of her betrayal or the justifications that followed, it was about the irreversible rupture of a bond that had once seemed unbreakable. "This isn't about finding someone to blame," I said quietly, the fight in my voice giving way to an unyielding finality. "It's about acknowledging that we are no longer the people we once were. Our paths have diverged, and no amount of apologies or explanations can change that." In that painful moment, I felt a grim resolve settle within me. I wasn't interested in healing the wounds that had been inflicted, I was determined to confront the truth head-on. The love we had shared was now overshadowed by the scars of betrayal, and any attempt to rebuild it would be a disservice to the honesty we both deserved. The conversation, once a desperate attempt to find solace in shared memories, had evolved into a mutual, albeit hostile, acceptance that our marriage was doomed. The intensity of the confrontation eventually gave way to a weary silence, a silence that spoke volumes of the finality of our situation. The rain outside began to subside, as if nature itself was acknowledging that the tempest had passed, leaving behind a stark and unyielding clarity. In that quiet aftermath, I knew that this confrontation was the turning point, the moment when everything irrevocably changed. We stood there for a long time, two souls intertwined by years of shared experiences and yet so estranged by the pain of betrayal. I looked into Rebecca's eyes, searching for the woman I once loved, but all I saw was regret and resignation. "I don't think we can ever go back to what we were," I said softly, the finality of my words hanging in the air. "We've lost something that can't be reclaimed, and I'm tired of pretending that everything can be fixed with time." It was in that moment I realized that our love, as deep as it had once been, was no longer enough to bridge the chasm between us. The trust that had once been the bedrock of our relationship had been irreparably shattered, and any attempt to salvage what remained would only prolong the inevitable. The confrontation had stripped away the last illusions, leaving us both exposed and raw, two individuals facing the undeniable truth that we were destined to part ways. As I turned away, the weight of our shared history pressed down on me, mingling with the relief of finally confronting the truth. I knew that the path ahead would be painful, marked by the bitter aftermath of a love betrayed. Yet, in that painful clarity, I also saw the possibility of forging a new identity from the ruins of our past, a future defined not by the ghosts of yesterday but by the promise of rediscovering who I was meant to be. As the days turned into a somber gray blur, I knew that the final act of our tragic play was inevitable. The confrontation of that stormy night in Chapter 3 had left an indelible scar on both of us, a mark of irrevocable change that signaled the end of the life we once shared. In the weeks that followed, the silence between Rebecca and me grew thicker, an unspoken agreement that our shared existence was crumbling beyond repair. Every morning, I awoke with the heavy realization that every moment, every shared glance or accidental brush of hands, was a painful reminder of a love that had withered under the weight of betrayal. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and intimacy, had transformed into a cold mausoleum of memories. Each room echoed with whispers of laughter that had long been replaced by the dissonant chords of regret and anger. I found myself methodically packing away the remnants of our shared past, a collection of photographs, old letters, and small mementos that once symbolized the love we had nurtured. As I placed each item into a cardboard box, I felt as though I was burying pieces of myself, trying to exorcise the ghost of a relationship that no longer belonged to either of us. The act was both cathartic and deeply sorrowful, a necessary ritual to prepare for the final severance. One crisp morning, as the light of dawn crept hesitantly through the half-drawn curtains, Rebecca and I sat at the kitchen table, a silence heavy with finality between us. There was no need for words at first, the quiet spoke volumes about the distance that had grown between our hearts. I looked at her, once the woman who had been my confidant and lover, now reduced to a shadow of guilt and regret. In her eyes, I saw the reflection of our broken promises, an acknowledgement that the person I had once known was no longer present. Rebecca broke the silence with a voice that trembled under the weight of inevitability. "Michael, I think we both know that this is the end," she whispered. Her words were like a death knell to any remaining hope of reconciliation. I could feel the finality in them, a resolve that had been forged through countless sleepless nights and relentless inner battles. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to find the words that could encapsulate the bitterness and relief mingled within me. "Yes, Rebecca," I replied quietly, though each syllable felt like it was chiseling away at the very core of my identity. "We have reached a point where continuing this life together only deepens our wounds." I paused, my gaze drifting to the scattered fragments of what once was our love, a stark contrast to the future that lay before us. In that moment, the decision was no longer about who was to blame or who had erred in love's intricate dance. It was about acknowledging that we had both been irreparably changed by our choices, that the foundation of our union had crumbled under the pressure of deceit and unspoken despair. I felt a bitter clarity settle over me. Our marriage was a relic of a past that could never be reclaimed. The final severance was not an abrupt explosion of rage, it was a slow, deliberate dismantling of the ties that once bound us. Over the next few days, we began the painful process of disentangling our lives. Legal documents were signed with trembling hands, and each conversation was a delicate negotiation between holding on to what was left and the need to move forward separately. Every step we took was laden with the realization that we were not just ending a relationship but severing a part of ourselves that had been intertwined for years. As I watched Rebecca drive away one chilly afternoon, the car's taillights fading into the distance, a profound mixture of sorrow and liberation washed over me. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the road to healing promised to be arduous and lonely. Yet, in that final act of separation, there was a glimmer of hope, a chance to rediscover who I was beyond the confines of a relationship defined by betrayal. In the solitude that followed, I often found myself revisiting the memories of our shared past, each recollection a bittersweet reminder of both the love we had once known and the betrayal that had shattered it. I poured these reflections into my journal, each word a testament to the pain of loss and the resilience required to rebuild a life from the ruins of shattered trust. There were moments when the weight of grief threatened to overwhelm me, but I learned slowly to see these memories not as chains that bound me to the past, but as stepping stones towards a future where I could finally be whole again. The process of healing was neither linear nor painless. There were days when the memories surged unbidden, evoking a sorrow so profound it left me breathless. In those moments, I sought solace in quiet walks through the park, in the simple rhythm of nature that seemed indifferent to human suffering. Each step I took was an act of defiance against the despair that threatened to engulf me, a small but significant stride towards reclaiming my identity. I also reached out to a few trusted friends, those who had stood by me even when the foundation of my world was shaking. Their presence was a reminder that, despite the betrayal, life still held fragments of genuine care and compassion. It was in these shared moments of vulnerability that I began to see a path forward, a future where the lessons of the past could guide me towards a more authentic existence, free from the illusions that had once bound me to a doomed marriage. In the quiet aftermath of our final separation, as I surveyed the empty rooms of our once shared home, I felt a profound sense of finality. The hostile breakup had been painful, marked by bitter words and tearful farewells, but it had also been a necessary purge, a cleansing of the toxins that had festered in our union. There was no dramatic epilogue, no grand gestures of reconciliation. There was only the stark reality of two lives parting ways, each determined to forge a new identity from the ashes of what had been. As I now sit here, pen in hand, reflecting on the turbulent chapters of our shared history, I understand that this final severance is not just an end, it is also a beginning. The hostility of our breakup, the raw pain of betrayal, will remain with me as scars that serve as reminders of the fragility of trust. But they will also be the impetus for a new chapter in my life, one defined by the pursuit of truth, authenticity, and the courage to start over. In the end, our story has become a cautionary tale, a testament to how love, when betrayed, can evolve into something unrecognizable and hostile. And as the final pieces of our past are locked away, I step forward into an uncertain future, determined to rebuild a life that honors both the lessons learned and the strength discovered amidst the ruins. Our love story, now a bitter memory, stands as a reminder that sometimes the most profound transformations occur not in the warmth of unity, but in the cold clarity of a final, hostile farewell.